All right, hello everyone. We're going to get started and welcome to the session titled Resonance in Animism, Utilizing the Human Voice to Commune with the Land, presented by Jenn LeBlanc. My name is Mona, and as a member of the American Society of Dowsers, it's my pleasure to be your virtual room monitor for this session. Before I officially introduce our speaker, I'd like to just call your attention to a few Zoom logistics. You're probably already aware, but just in case you're not, in the right-hand corner, you can adjust your view video layout. You can display your own Zoom view screen to have some options for the speaker view, thumbnail view, and gallery view. Furthermore, I'll be monitoring the time for this session and the chat thread. And by the way, you can save the chat thread if you are clicking on chat and you do see the chat down in the right-hand corner, you'll see 3 dots. If you click on that, you can actually save the chat thread if you're interested in that. For this session, questions will be addressed in real time at the end of the session. Jen will be speaking live today and will address questions, as I mentioned, towards the end of the presentation. And she's graciously offered to continue the conversation into the lounge. So we have put the link for the lounge. I'll throw it in there. I see the meeting ID and passcode, but I'll throw the link in too, just in case you don't have it. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Jenn LeBlanc. Jen is an apprentice of both Salacro, spirit speaker, and Sierra McFeeder's shamanic practitioner. Having grown up in a Roman Catholic home, her love of spiritual song began in the church choir, which she joined at an incredibly young age. Attending practices with her father, a seed of vocal offerings was planted during that time. And now she's utilizing its foundational roots to connect with nature on a vibrational level. With an ancestry of healers, metaphysical practitioners, and even saints, Jen is continuously engaging deeply in the spiritual world, and her scientific education and experience allow her to sit at the nexus of the two. Perched between science and mysticism, Jen works to facilitate connection between people and their elemental surroundings through animism and song. And I hand this over to you, Jen.
Hi, everybody. That's quite the lead-in. So I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint and see if I can sort of make this work now that I'm in control. Let's make sure this is up. Share the screen. Thank you for your patience. So I don't miss any important steps. And I do believe I can make us all go away. I've practiced this several times, so let's see what happens. My understanding is that my little face does not go away, even when I had the video panel. So I hope everyone can still see me. Mona, can you see me and my screen and hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Perfect. Just checking.
Yep. Yep.
Before I jump in. Perfect. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me. I am Jen. So what I want to do today is sort of take you on a little journey through my thoughts and experiences and research to get me where I am today. And maybe it will spark some curiosity in you or open a path for you that you perhaps didn't realize, or even just give you some new information you had not heard before. I have a lot of works cited. There's in the handout at the end, there's about 3 pages of where a lot of this information came from if you wanted to look into these things even more. So our experience today, just want to give you a little prequel. We'll talk about animism, both modern and ancestral. a little bit about my personal journey, sort of how did I get here, the hagstone and the river singer. What consciousness is, well, I don't give you all that, but we're going to talk about consciousness, waves and resonance and connection, some sound basics, just sound itself and the science behind it, just a little bit. The living vocal traditions is my favorite part. I love sharing those. We're going to talk about toning and what it is, and I'll give you a very brief example because I do not have time to get too into the slides today. If I get too focused on large descriptions, we run out of time. I will talk about finding your voice and making room for yourself, maybe a little bit of some suggestions for how you can develop this for yourself. How nature speaks is maybe 2 or 3 slides just about some of the new science. I wanted to throw that in. Things we're uncovering, things we're understanding, things that connect to the things that I'm bringing up today. Sound transcends time is where I get a little bit philosophical. So these are my thoughts and feelings and philosophical musings. So I'm going to throw that in at the end for what it's worth. Hume, which we will get to later, it's one of the living vocal traditions. This is a quote from one of the documentaries that I researched. Do not doubt when one tells you that I speak to the mountain, water, and grass. It is because beautiful nature is a great composer itself and transmits its own creations to human beings through gifted performers. The animistic worldview, and I call it a worldview because that is what it is. Animism is a worldview. It is a way of seeing the world and engaging with the world. General animism, as I said, is a way of experiencing the world in a unified and holistic manner. It acknowledges the experience of other non-human beings. It's a close relationship and reverence for nature and is infused with conscious equality. Conscious equality is probably the most important point of this slide. Without it, you don't have animism. It's a multidimensional, ever-changing reality. Ari Thurger, find him in the note citations. I would suggest if you want to learn more about animism, he has a wealth of knowledge to share. The term first appeared in a British anthropology book, Primitive Cultures, by Sir Edward Taylor in 1871. Unfortunately, it was used as a blanket term to describe perceived primitive spirituality that the Western anthropologists were encountering in the field. And it was used pejoratively to describe what was considered primitive belief systems. So it was not used in a respectful way, derogatorily. It was essentially seen as a proto-religion that was no longer valid in an analytic, scientific, and monotheistic modern society. It was not sleek and beautiful. It was judged as imaginary and delusional, whereas modern religion was seen as elegant and refined. So it really invalidated quite a few of the indigenous cultures that were discovered. Now that attitude had persisted well before 1871, but that's when the term was used and created to describe something they could sort of set aside and try to move away from. Such limited perception led to decades of mechanistic dissection of the world in the hope of finding an explanation to the larger questions of life and reality. And mechanistic dissection means they were trying to look at the smaller and the smaller and the smaller. They assumed once they got to the smallest particles of everything, it would all make sense. And I think a lot of us know once they got to the quantum level, it stopped making sense completely, which was fantastic. So we did not get the answers we wanted from mechanistic dissection. There's a lot of misconceptions about animism because it's sort of in its resurgence. And so we're relearning. It's not the idea that all things have a soul, because the soul is a human construct. And applying it to other beings is inappropriate, and it's never going to result in an accurate understanding of the other being. We've designed it basically to apply to ourselves. We are unique. We have a soul. And so expecting other things to have a soul that we have doesn't really make sense. Using that term results in a limited validation for the experience of non-humans. And remember, this is not a religious concept. Animism is not religion. It's not a religious concept. It's not the idea that things are simply animated. Being animated implies that they're filled with life, as we define it, and movement. They are animated. And not all non-human beings or other persons move. Rocks don't move. So science has designated characteristics of life, and many of the non-human beings don't fit those characteristics. So not fitting into that list does not indicate a lack of experience or ability to experience existence, just that they don't fit into our defined terms of what life is. Sentience is used a lot to describe animism, and it's a very tricky one. It requires emotional response based on the general definition of what sentience is. So yes, other beings are engaged in a complex experience that's very unique to them. But it's limiting to impose the idea that our emotional response system is the only model for them. It's a little bit egocentric and misleading. We can't assume that they're experiencing the same emotional response system. Ancestral animism. We're engaged in a conscious dance of attunement with everything that exists. The weaving of reciprocity and the intimacy of that connection. That is what animism is. That's the essence of that worldview. On a fundamental level, it's a feedback loop of vibrational input and response, a highly complex and continuous relationship between all beings, and it's fundamentally symbiotic. And again, I'm going to emphasize symbiotic. Without that, it's not animism. Like I said, there's a resurgence in the early stages right now, which is wonderful, and I appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing how it develops. It's not a veneration or belief system. I also wanted to point that out. I think a lot of people tend to venerate. That's what they don't understand, but it's not about veneration. It's a highly practical and intentional recognition that all things are equally significant. Animists do not see themselves as higher or lower than other beings. We are equal. That all things engage with their environment with a variety of complexities. It's good to recognize the different complexities of the different beings and things you encounter. And all things are capable of some level of response, even if only, and I say only, on the quantum scale. All things can respond to their environment. My personal experiences. So sorry, I get a little vulnerable, and I tell you about some of the experiences that I had that led me down this little thought process road. So I want to front load some info. If you don't know what a hagstone is considered a sacred object. They can be any type of stone. The type does not matter, as long as it has a natural hole that's been created through it. It's often created with water. So you find them in rivers, on the ocean, the beaches. They've had many names over the centuries. They've been considered sacred for hundreds and thousands of years. Witchstone, adderstone, hexstone, fairystone, holy stone, and Odin stone are just some of them. I had to chop this list in half. So I wanted to front load that for you. Caretaking. So the animistic worldview is created through the reciprocity that I mentioned. A huge part of that is caretaking, taking care of the land so that it can take care of you. And there's a beautiful attunement and balance that plays out. After I moved to my current home, it's right next to a river. And I loved going to the river and experiencing it. I had never lived next to a river before. And I noticed a lot of garbage, rusty things, glass. It just wasn't clean. And no one was taking care of it. So I decided to do that. I loved the river. It was beautiful. And I knew my scientific education told me that the things that were in it were not healthy for it. So I wanted to help. It was done out of deep love without the intent of benefit other than having a clean river. After a few years, I began to sing to the river as an offering of respect. I was learning Galdr, which I'll get to later, and toning as a way of communicating. So I did. I was also getting more comfortable with using my voice. I've always been a singer, but I lost my voice for a long time. And I was starting to develop it again and get it back in a more authentic and profound way. So it was a good audience. I started getting little gifts. I didn't think of them as gifts at the time, but I would find really cool things that were pretty specific to me. But I didn't expect that. It was never an expectation that I would get things from the river. I always accepted them with gratitude though. So one day I'm sitting by the river and I say out loud, my partner was there, I was talking to him, I've never found a hagstone, but I really want to. They're very important, they're very special, they're very cool, and I really want one. And within 2 minutes, I looked down and found a hagstone. So that was interesting. I was curious about that. Within an hour, I had found 13. So I walked home with 13 hagstones. I said, I manifested. So I said the thing and got them all. So I cleared out that whole little section of river of hagstones. And we found that very funny and very interesting. But I continued to find hagstones. I have to update this slide all the time. I'm up to like 42 now, I think. I find them everywhere, but they're very specific to my little river. That was really my first clue that I wanted to start getting more information. I wanted to start researching more. Something odd had happened. What I settled on after processing for quite a long time and doing some journey work and some spiritual connection to myself and the land was that I initiated communication. I verbally requested something and I gave the river a way to communicate. Previously, it had been communicating, but I probably wasn't picking up on it because I don't speak river. But when I asked for the stone, I gave it away to tell me that it was reciprocating our relationship. So then I had a lot of questions. So can I communicate with a non-human entity? Does science have anything to offer about this? And is there an intersection of science and spirituality that offers answers? Because that's the beautiful place I like to sit. There's the tensegrity that I just adore. That's usually where I find the most intriguing answers or questions. So when I started this process, I did not want to try to force other entities to find ways to communicate with me. I was very grateful that I got all these stones, but I decided that it was not the river's job to find a way to communicate with me. They tried really hard for that one. And I decided it was my job to figure out a way to communicate with it out of respect. Did not have expectations on the river. I put the expectations on myself to figure it out. So what can I do to facilitate communicating with that? I don't know. It was an interesting quandary. What do both organic and inorganic matter have in common? I finally settled on vibration, frequency, and sound, which wasn't a huge revelation in and of itself. People use these concepts pretty frequently, I think, in the metaphysical community in a lot of ways. But applying them to this particular situation, I found very interesting. And I immediately became obsessed with all types of sounds, I got way too excited when I heard a new, there was a new offering on YouTube or a new video popping up of some interesting sound that someone had found. And I tried to mimic the sounds, which was pretty hilarious. I'm not going to lie. Mimicking some of these sounds, and I'm going to get to them in a minute. My partner is a very patient person, is all I'm going to say. The cacophony of sounds. So we're going to start with this, about 5 of them. I wanted to share some of these because they're very fascinating and very intriguing. This is the sun. So what they do, the electromagnetic field that we are receiving is then transmitted to sound so that we can process it. I find that incredibly soothing. Now I will say it's often like a little blip as I try to move to the next slide. For some reason with the videos, it does that. I apologize. So this is the sound of mushrooms. As you can see on your screen. I got way too excited about this one when I found it. Mushrooms. These are these little biosensors. I don't think these are the ones you can buy. The plant video and a few has those. You can download an app on your phone and get these little biosensors and literally listen to your house plants. So that is fun. The bearded seals. This is very loud. I'll give you a pre-warning. If you've not heard bearded seals before, this is a treat. I want to take a second, have you reflect on me sitting in my living room trying to make that sound. All right, plants. I would like to end with that. I think it's very important to note the change in sound when the plant is touched. So, hold on. Excited, it wants to play. So this is different planets. As I said before, the electromagnetic vibrations that exist in space, and they map them as sounds. It's similar to the sun video. There, I just find it fascinating, the other planets. Every planet has its own sound. I'm gonna skip around a little. Here's Venus. Mars. Hold on, I want you to prepare yourself for Saturn because it's vastly different than the others. Saturn. That was Saturn. And my favorite is Titan, which is a moon of Saturn. I like to end on this one because it's a little more pleasant. Doesn't want to stop. Titan likes this. Okay. Whoop. Boop. So, the spiritual awakening. I love those sounds. I spend a little bit too long listening to those sounds in my presentation every time. So, about a year and a half after starting this little journey of sound, I was searching for an old copper mine, Vermont. I live in Vermont, and we have a lot of old mines, wonderful geology here, and I just love searching for the old abandoned mines. So I was looking for an old copper mine in the next town over, and I began just toning, and I often toned in the forest every time I was out there, trying to attune to the sounds of the forest, attune to nature, and communicate. And all of a sudden I heard a cicada, which wasn't too shocking, but I did realize I was making a strange, vibraty, kind of weird cicada-like sound. It was very buzzy. And then I continued to tone, and then I heard another cicada. And before I knew it, the entire forest had exploded into, like, it sounded like every cicada in Vermont was just screaming away. And that freaked me out, I won't lie. And so I stopped because I didn't know if I was doing this, if what was going on. And my partner, who again was with me through most of these experiences, really got confused and asked a lot of questions that I could not answer. I do not know. But I didn't assume that I had done something. But I definitely was curious. So a few days later, and all of this happened within a week, which is why it definitely caught my attention, which often happens with awakenings. Like, something will happen. It's too many things all at the same time. You almost can't ignore it at that point. Another local mine, another local abandoned mine. As you can see, I do that a lot in my free time. I had collected some things I wanted, and I was going to go home. I decided to practice coning, which we will get to later if you've not heard of it. It's a very high-pitched shouting that I can't describe any other way, but you'll hear later. And all of a sudden I heard something or someone, I thought it was a person responding back. I thought they were teasing me a little bit. And sometimes you yell and people respond back, and you yell and they respond back. That happens. So that was happening. And then I noticed someone else was responding in a different area, in a different direction. And then I noticed 3, And then I realized, and they were the exact same sounds. We were going back and forth. And then I realized there were other yips and sounds. And I had accidentally got the attention of a lot of coyotes. And I wasn't sure exactly what I was communicating to them. So I decided to leave pretty quickly at that point because I didn't, and they were getting closer. The sounds were getting closer and louder. So we just left. So the last one in this journey was a waterfall. Now, we have a lot of beautiful waterfalls in Vermont, and I had visited this one previously, and I had sang to that river. But what I remembered is that I had turned and sang downriver for some reason the first time. But this time I decided I was curious now. I was seeming to be communicating with things that I didn't think I could. So I'm going to try singing at the waterfall and see what happens. And I was toning at it quite loudly. And again, attuning myself to the sound, the vibration, what I was feeling was coming back at me and trying to reflect it. And at some point I did feel a profound shift of energy and I let it flow. I try not to fight it. And my voice took on a vibrancy that I'd not heard before. And it seemed to blend with the sound of the waterfall coming at me. And it took on a whole new sound and became louder and louder and louder. And I just remember doing it, but thinking in my own mind, this is really loud and it's not stopping. And it's sort of making me uncomfortable because I knew it wasn't just me. I could not possibly make a sound that loud. And again, it freaked me out, so I stopped doing it, which I've learned to stop stopping. I continue on now, but at the time, this was new. So it was a little uncomfortable. What I settled on after some processing was resonance. A very scientific definition of resonance is the state of a system in which an abnormally large vibration is produced in response to an external stimulus, occurring when the frequency of the stimulus is the same or nearly the same as the natural vibration frequency of the system. So I was the external stimulus, singing at the waterfall. Somehow I matched that vibration and it reflected back and we created something new. An easier definition: a phenomenon in which an acoustic system amplifies sound waves whose frequency matches one of its own natural frequencies of vibration. That really became a curious quandary for me to. So, consciousness. Talking about non-human beings now. And I started thinking about what makes them conscious. The oscillation of actual entities is resonance. And shared resonance is what results in a combination of consciousness. This is from the resonance theory of consciousness, which I got really excited when I found. Tam Hunt from 2019. I will elaborate on that later. So the idea of consciousness is very controversial. There's a lack of accepted operational definition in just about every scientific field. Every scientific field has its own definition of what it is, and they all disagree slightly. And there's a lot of fighting, to be honest with you. It's hotly debated. So they're trying to figure out how they're going to simplify and come to a unified definition, but we have not yet. There's many different theories by all different branches of science about how to study it, how to understand it. Most of them erroneously position humans as the supreme consciousness that all other beings must be compared to, though, which immediately creates a biased system that favors only that which mirrors our own perceptions of consciousness. So I don't presume to have all the answers. I wanted to point that out. I do not. I'm not going to tell you what consciousness is. I cannot do that today. But I do want to give you some interesting theories, the ones that I am researching and looking into, the ones that I like. The feedback loop is a really simple and scientific concept. It's a system in which there's a cycle of input and stimulus and output response. Alfred North Whitehead, a mathematician and philosopher, which is a wonderful combo, described it as the oscillation between subjective prehension and objective concrescence. Basically, every entity goes through a cycle of sensing its environment and then deciding how to manifest the next moment. Input, output. A note on vibrations and frequencies generally. These are things we know. The quantum field theory defines that all matter is essentially vibrations in quantum fields. We know that all things vibrate or are in constant motion. Even stationary objects are vibrating and oscillating at various frequencies. All objects and mechanical systems have natural frequencies. They may even have many natural frequencies depending on their geometry. That's my favorite. So that's just some basic info about that. Dr. Leroy Littlebear, who was a celebrated academic in a variety of fields, and a Blackfoot Indian, describes a native paradigm in what is called indigenous science, which I feel really blends well, a science and spirituality coming together. He describes it as a constant motion or flux, that everything consists of energy waves, that those energy waves are what we were referring to when we call spirit. And we are made of energy waves or a combination thereof. The resonance theory of consciousness. I told you I would get to it, and here we are. So Tam Hunt, who is an ethics lawyer and researcher, it was very interesting, and Jonathan Schooler with PhD in psychology created the resonance theory. That synchronous vibrations or resonance, synchronous vibrations, are not only the foundation of human consciousness, but general physical reality. And I really like this one, given the road I was going down. As I said, resonance is a type of motion or oscillation between states. As two vibrating objects come into proximity, they can begin to vibrate at the same frequency. This is all from the resonance theory of consciousness. So this is where it gets really interesting. Higher levels of consciousness are directly related to the levels of complexity of the entity. At the atomic level, each atom or even subatomic particle can experience a small amount of consciousness, a limited consciousness, if you want to say that. Subatomic particles are constantly engaging with each other and responding to that engagement. They're always blinking in and out. And if you look into the quantum level and the behavior of like bosons and things, quarks, it's very fascinating. So I suggest researching that if you haven't. And I want to remind everybody that feedback loop of input-output that I discussed before. So at levels of as the levels of organization and matter increase, so too does the complexity of consciousness. So that we have micro consciousness, maybe in our cells, but as the layers of us develop, that results in our macro conscious experience. And again, this is all from the resonance theory. So really, we are just layered complexity that results in our profound higher level of consciousness. But there is a level of micro consciousness on every step. So we have atoms and cells, organs, organ systems, and all the way up. Which might be one of the reasons why we have a hard time understanding consciousness and what it is and where it is. It might not just be stuck in our brain. Biological systems, I feel that biological systems are easier to comprehend because it's our experience, but that does not invalidate other entities and their experience. Sound. Sound physics, some basics. Sound's a vibration. It propagates as an acoustic wave through a medium. Often the medium is air or sometimes a fluid, and sometimes earth. Sound is a form of energy, just like electricity and light. So the photon is to light as the phonon is to sound. So there's energy there. A sound is made when molecules vibrate and move in a pattern called waves or sound waves. Sound wave qualities, some basics. Oh, here's where the laser pointer has to come in. I am teacher, my day job, so gotta have a laser pointer. So sound waves have amplitude or volume, that is compression and expansion. They have frequency and pitch, or cycles per second, and the wavelength, the distance between compressions. So wavelength here, the amplitude here, that's the height. Sorry, I did not use my laser pointer appropriately before. And here we have the wavelength. I love this image because we have amplitude. We just talked about that. That's the compression and sort of decompression of the wave of sound. All right, here we go. Up, down, here's our wave. Now there's a wavelength, but we're not focused on that. This is what the air molecules are doing as the sound moves. The height of the amplitude, they are compressed. As the wave moves away, they are released from that compression and back and forth and back and forth. So there is activity happening in the molecules that the sound is vibrating through. The human auditory field is only about 20 to 20,000 hertz. Some people can't hear all the way up and can't hear all the way down. We're all very different and unique. Above that are ultrasounds. We know dogs can hear them, dogs and cats and other animals, all the way up to 160,000 hertz. And that's where we get dolphins and bats, famous friends. But down below 20, a lot of people don't realize that animals, there are some animals that use infrasounds, which I find utterly fascinating. Elephants, which I will actually explain more about later, and moles. So there are animals using these lower frequency sounds to communicate. And this is all communication, of course. So I want to throw in one slide about, and this is really dense, I know, dense science, but there have been a lot of recent developments in the science of sound. Now we call sound has mass is a recent revelation, in quotes. They admit that they probably should have known that and they kind of did all along, but no one bothered to do the research to confirm it. It was confirmed. They did the research. Thank you. But an interesting point is that it's gravitational and it's gravitationally negative. So not to get too technical, but sound, it sort of floats upwards, which makes sense if you think about it. And that phonons, which is the energy, interact with the gravitational field in a way that requires them to transport mass as they move. So the phonons of sound are actually moving things. We don't think of that, but that's happening. Even if it's a very minute amount, it's still happening. There was an interesting study that you can levitate things just with sound. I'll look into that later too. Sound healing, I wanted to give a little props to sound healing. It's very important. And I know that Eileen McCusick has, I hope you went to her talk last night. And if you didn't get a chance, go to her workshop this afternoon. If you haven't seen her work, she's phenomenal. But I want to talk about it generally. It's not new at all. It's a very ancient science, but it's definitely a resurgence, the sound specifically. Frequency and vibration that is most natural to whatever the biofield or the organ or the thing that you're trying to focus on. Resonance plays a key role in the application and efficacy of that treatment, and that's why I'm bringing it up. Resonance principles are employed to reharmonize the cells. So then again, remember the hierarchy of the body. Now you're trying to apply the resonance concept to reharmonize those cells. So we already use it for our own bodies to imprinted disruptive frequencies. So troublesome imprints may be toxic substances, emotional traumas, pathogens, whatever has harmed the body, knocked it out of balance. We apply the sound with the resonance principle to reharmonize. So toning, what the heck am I talking about? Toning is a sustained vibratory sound of a single tone, often with vowel sounds. We tone with vowel. The tone is held as long as possible and is typically held steady without intentional melody. It bypasses the use of phonetic language and replaces it with a more foundational frequency that can be recognized by all beings. Ah, there's the gold. Much like a singing bowl, toning uses the human voice to create sound. I am going to give you an example. Let me get some water. I didn't used to do this in my presentations, but people have asked me to. So an example of toning. There are writings that indicate that ancient Egyptian priests actually intoned vowels in their initiation ceremonies and in several rites that they had. This is a quote from 200 BC. In Egypt, when priests sing hymns to the gods, they sing the 7 vowels in due succession, and the sound has such euphony that men listen to it instead of the flute and the lyre. And it's interesting that hieroglyphics contain no vowels, which has been theorized that vowel sounds are sacred to connect with the divine. And so they weren't used in casual society. I have to speed this up because I know I'm going to go over if I don't. So, toning benefits. It clears and balances the energetic body. The breathing patterns utilized relax the nervous system. It's now used in combination with a lot of healing modalities. I know a lot of Reiki practitioners that also tone. I do that myself. So it's being applied to a number of different, and I do play with the tuning forks as well in biofeedback tuning and toning. So it's sort of being applied to a wonderful variety of things. It creates resonance with our own body. So if you tone yourself, you're creating resonance with your own body, and you're really connecting to yourself and facilitating your own healing. But once you've done that, advanced toning connects us to our larger environment, and eventually you can heal land or other entities. You can then apply it to other things. I do have this in the notes that I added. So if you want that chart, it just shows the chakra tones. This is what I did on Friday, if you happen to come to my toning exercise. So this is a chart that has all the different vowels that correspond to the different chakras, colors, notes. It's a basic scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do system. So if you want more info on that. The living vocal traditions. So these are traditions that have been held by indigenous cultures for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They are beautiful. I could not get them all into one presentation nor do them all justice in this short period of time, but I will take you through, I think it's 5. Culling, as I mentioned before, this is what I irritated a bunch of coyotes with. It's a herding call, a domestic Scandinavian music form, traditionally used to call livestock down from like the high mountains and the different fields when they were grazing all day. So this is how they used to call them in. Most often involves high-pitched shouts between 780 and 1568 hertz. And I always forget these numbers. The human female voice is between like 168 and 255 hertz. So this is significantly loud. Culling is often described as very high ornamental shouts produced with a minor scale, not a major scale. Some of the old recordings have lower pitches too, so it's a very complex tradition. All right, let's do this. I'm gonna fast forward to when the cows start coming in because that's my favorite part. Love it. Just love that. Okay. Galder, which I had mentioned before I was doing To the River. Galder singing is a Scandinavian tradition. It's runic based, so the Elder Futhark. Incantations are created using a strong and powerful voice. So it's very loud. Traditional Galder singing is very, very loud, as you can be. It's almost an insult if you don't go full volume because you're trying to communicate to the universe. It's powerful breath and elongated tones. You will sense a theme. So Lars Enochson, I don't know if I can catch it. He's a Galdra master in Sweden. Fast forward to a particular spot. All right. Thank you, Lord. Oh, so it always skips a little there. Yoiking. This is a beautiful tradition. The Sami people of Northern Europe. So this is the most northern indigenous society. Yoiking is used to express relationships to people and nature. Its intent is communicating with the earth. I'm sure you started to pick up on my theme at this point. There are few to no lyrics, sometimes animal calls. Pardon me. The Noati, or the Sami shaman, could perform or did perform the yoiks while beating a drum to connect with the spirit world. So it's deep spiritual tradition. I actually have 2 videos because I couldn't choose. These are very old recordings.
Lo 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 lo, colo lo 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 lo, colo lo 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 lo, colo lo 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 lo, colo lo lo lo, colo lo 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 lo, lo colo lo lo, colo lo lo lo. La 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 la. La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la.
All right, one more for you on this one. These 3 women, there's a rather, well, I think it's famous, but it's probably not as famous as I like to think. They were at Standing Rock, and they led a group yoiking, and it was just beautiful to watch them hang the Sami flag. And I just love that indigenous cultures from so far away came to support. Feel that in my heart. So these 3 women, this is not them at Standing Rock, but this is what they did at Standing Rock. It's just a clear video. So I like to play this one. I always end up singing that song for like the next 3 hours every time I hear them. So over to North America. Nunavut is a large northernmost territory of Canada. And as you can see over here in the corner, there are 4, I believe, different places where the Inuit live. They have a version of throat singing. So there's several cultures, indigenous cultures, that have held on to throat singing, but I wanted to focus on theirs specifically. A lot of TikTok. Inuit young people are starting to bring it back and getting people excited about it. So I love seeing that. There's a deep emotional significance to the people, and they do attempt to imitate the sounds of nature and animals. This one is very, very unique. It's much different than the others. I love that. Let me go fast forward. It's very, very cool. And part of the tradition is that they always face each other. They interlock arms, and they're basically singing back and forth to each other. And I just love that. It's so beautiful. It's such a wonderfully rich tradition. The Yeli, these people are the Pygmies from Cameroon, Central Africa. This is polyphonic vocal choirs with several melodies that are sung simultaneously. And they use a very distinct yodeling technique. Traditionally, the women sing and the men dance the song. So that's just cultural. So let me get these guys going. I love this. Hold on. Let me skip ahead a little bit. have to end it on that little boy dancing the song. It's too much. Hume, which I mentioned at the very beginning, is a very interesting tradition. I'm actually trying to learn this one, but it's very challenging. So it's overtone singing. So it's simultaneously emitting two distinct sounds at the same time. So there's a low continuous drone sound, and then you produce a melody of harmonics. So this is in Mongolia, Western Mongolia in the mountains. Imitates the sound of nature and is believed to have been learned from birds, whose spirits are central to their shamanic practices. So it's a very, very, very important tradition. Hold on. I believe the middle here at about 2. Juicy stuff. I love that. So, finding your voice. So, I wanted you to notice that the living traditions are not always what we would consider pretty or a performance. Our authentic voice is not perfect. I think a lot of people get stuck in this idea of the perfect voice. It's supposed to sound beautiful. It's supposed to sound perfect. But your authentic voice is vastly different than your speaking voice. I worked with someone recently, and she was a very loud person, and she thought that her authentic voice when toning and singing would be, with sacred singing, would be very, very loud. But it took her a long time to discover that her beautiful voice, her authentic voice, was quiet. And that's wonderful. I love that. But it took her some time, and she had to work through a lot of emotional blocks to get there. Often you feel really uncomfortable and silly when you hit those blocks because you're experimenting with yourself, and that feels very vulnerable as you do it. I mean, I want you to reflect back on some of the weird sounds in the beginning that I was telling you I was making in front of people. But it's necessary to push through those feelings because they're a clue that you're on the right path. If you're sensing discomfort in your own body, that's probably a good place to be. There's always growth in that discomfort. I wanted you to notice, and I hope you did, that toning is a foundational piece of many of those living traditions. So authentic voices from thousands of years ago still living today that we can connect to in some way. Basic toning is a good foundational step into that direction. To tone, you just take a deep breath and allow the sound to flow through your body unencumbered by fear. And I understand that's a lot to ask for. We all struggle with different levels of fear. But if you can figure out a way to release it, if you can work through that process for yourself, you're going to be really surprised at how fantastic the sound is. I do suggest practicing alone until you've gained confidence. I don't think doing this in front of other people is always the best way. Maybe that's how you do things, and I support that. But for most of us, we want to do it alone privately until we're more comfortable. And again, I try making any other sounds. I did sit for hours and just try to make weird sounds with my voice, just the strangest things I could do, even if they were ridiculous, to test my voice, to figure things out. The more you engage with your powerful voice, the greater the gifts that will reveal themselves, not only with your voice, but your entire life. New scientific studies. So this is where I'm going to get into a few slides about things that you might not know about, points that I'm trying to make, that we are starting to understand more about the world than we previously did. We're giving ourselves permission to look into things that previously we would have sort of kept the door shut on. And this is opening up the wide world for us. Suzanne Simard is a famous ecologist. She just released a book I suggest getting if you can, of Finding the Mother Tree. She was the one that did the work on the roots, the fungus, the fungal roots communicating with the trees and creating that vast network of communication through the whole forest. So that's all her. Celebrate her. I love that picture. That is her. It's a beautiful photo. Ed Wagner, a PhD level physicist, a number of years ago, did find evidence of plant communication via what he called W waves. So this is an interesting one. If you drop into a tree, you can see that adjacent trees put out an electrical impulse. So this indicates they communicated directly. So it really was, one tree is here, you chop at this tree, you get an electrical impulse from another tree. And he didn't have any other way of explaining this. He called it W waves. People didn't take him as seriously at the time, but we're looking more into it again now. But chemical signals take longer than an instant to travel typically. There's a lot of processes that have to happen. So it's a very curious and interesting study. Peter Wolben is, and I hope I'm saying that name right, I feel like I'm butchering it, is a German forester and author. Now he put out The Hidden Life of Trees. It's a very famous book, What They Feel, How They Communicate. So a few highlights from that book. Well, trees are far more alert, social, sophisticated, even intelligent than we previously thought is the general theme of the book. But 2 points that I wanted to take or give you is that mimosa plants are highly reactive. So they're the ones that the leaves just react immediately to touch. So if you drip water on them, this was the study, they dripped water on them, they kept reacting, and eventually over time, they stopped reacting to the water, recognizing that it wasn't a threat. What's fascinating about that is that weeks later, after they'd stopped doing that, dripping the water on them, when water was reapplied in the same way, they remembered. They remembered that that particular touch was safe. And another interesting point is that thirst, when trees get very, very thirsty, apparently they do what's called screaming, which the book describes. It's a little anthropomorphic, but vibrations occurred in the trunk when the flow of water from the root to the leaves is interrupted. So these weird vibrations start to happen when it doesn't have enough water. Elephants, I love this. If you've not heard before, they communicate with infrasound, lower than 20 hertz, the base of their trunk, where it enters their skull. So the vibrations are amplified by their honeycomb design of their skull. So if you could imagine, they can't really have a super, super dense skull because they're huge, and they probably would just kind of fall over. Their necks would have to be massive to carry it. So they have this weird, interesting honeycomb skull that really allows amplification of the sound. Airborne, the vibrations can be heard. Now this is lower than we can hear, but airborne can be heard 2 to 3 miles away by other elephants. Underground seismic waves can be perceived up to 12 miles away. It can travel through their toes all the way up their legs and into their ears and for processing, but they also have somatosensory reception, vibrationally sensitive cells in their feet and the tip of their trunk that pick up the vibrations. So elephants are having these wondrous communications that we did not realize they were having. I did put a link to a really, I think the Cornell lab has some great recordings of those, but I just did not have time. Ooh, we're almost out too. So I'll go through these quickly. There'll probably be a lot of questions about them. These are my sort of philosophical ramblings, if you will. But I've been thinking a lot about time and sound and time. The conscious human experience is limited by the linear perception. There's a lot of debates about what time is, if it's real. The advent of phonetic writing narrowed our focus to the visual, and we've lost a great deal of our ability to process things through sound and auditory. Sound, especially created by instruments or human voices, become a sonification of time. We are transported to those places, and it's not limited to a fixed point. The complex layering of the past and present that reverberate forward. It allows us to experience transient time and often transforms into a layered oral experience. Oral as in sound. In this way, ancient sounds transcend time. Their vibrations transport us to primordial temporal experiences that still linger within our DNA and ripple through the water that chirally encases it. And we've learned that there's water encasing your DNA. And the chirality, which is the end of, you can't superimpose, you can actually, it's used to read the DNA. We're doing a lot more research now about that. So it's significant in how we even access our own DNA. Sound is a profound storyteller if we can just remember how to listen. Echoes of the past that can be accessed now and in the future. To sum up all that stuff, vibration is a universal language. Sound can create vibrational connections between human and non-human entities. Resonance is a deep connection that allows a shared consciousness for brief moments. Toning and traditional singing practices utilize the human voice to match the frequencies of non-human entities, which manifest that resonance. And the use of these traditional vocal songs enable us to facilitate connection with beings that seem to transcend time itself. And that's what I've got for you.
Jenn, thank you so much. This was such a rich presentation, and thank you for offering to meet people in the lounge. I have put in the lounge link. I do want to point out that someone did have a question, what is the sound of earth? So is it in that video, by the way?
It's not. I didn't put it in there because the sound of the earth is so low, it's difficult to, you can look that up though. It does exist. There's a video, but it's very, 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 very low. It's more in the infrasound range, so it wouldn't have been as like, you know, drastic as like Saturn.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. And so, folks, you can join Jenn in the lounge link, and please remember to fill out the evaluation. Thank you, Jenn.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you in a minute. Bye.